This account has been preserved in whispers and reports. Small changes to details change the meaning of the story we present here. The version passed along by local records and contemporary reporting. In a quiet Wisconsin town, a man who seemed harmless became the center of one of America's most chilling criminal investigations, and his name would later echo through Hollywood. This is the story of Ed Gein, the man, the investigation, and the uneasy line between true crime and fiction. Plainfield, Wisconsin rule, conservative, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names. Edward Gein grew up here, the son of a strict, domineering mother and an absent father. Locals described him as quiet, odd, and helpful. He fixed fences, did small, odd jobs, and otherwise kept to himself. His early life was marked by isolation, a harsh upbringing that limited his social interactions and tethered him to the family farm. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a boy and then a man who was always present but rarely truly known by the community around him. He was seen as a simple, harmless figure, someone you might wave to on the street without a second thought, a fixture of the small-town landscape. But beneath this unassuming exterior, a complex and deeply troubled world was taking shape. One that would remain hidden for decades within the walls of his family's isolated farmhouse, far from the prying eyes of the community. His mother's influence was profound. She conveyed a rigid moral outlook and a deep suspicion of the outside world, particularly of women. Her teachings isolated Ed and his brother, fostering a sense of dependence that would define his entire life. According to those who knew the family, she was the absolute authority in the household. Her word was law, and her views shaped Ed's perception of reality. When his father and brother died, his bond with his mother intensified. And then, when she died, some who knew Ed said a part of him seemed to vanish with her. He retreated into the house, sealing off her room as a shrine and living with routines that neighbors found increasingly strange. His isolation deepened into something far more profound. The farmhouse became a sealed world, a place where the past was preserved and the present was held at bay. His behavior, once just considered odd, began to worry those few who still interacted with him, hinting at the severe psychological decline happening in solitude. In the late 1950s, reports began to surface. Women from the surrounding area went missing, creating a quiet current of fear in a region unaccustomed to such events. First, Mary Hogan, a local tavern owner, disappeared in 1954. Then, 3 years later, Bernice, the owner of the town's hardware store, vanished. Warden's son told investigators that Ed Gein had been in the store the day she disappeared and had mentioned he'd be back later for some antifreeze. This detail, coupled with a growing unease and stories of odd late-night activities around the Gein property, finally led local law enforcement to obtain a search warrant. For years, there had been whispers and strange rumors stalk of grave robbing and odd purchases, but with Warden's disappearance, the authorities finally had a concrete reason to look behind the closed doors of the Gein farmhouse. The investigation that followed would uncover a scene far more disturbing than anyone in Plainfield could have ever imagined. When officers searched the farmhouse, they found an environment that shocked them. The house had been allowed to fall into a state of extreme disrepair, with rooms filled with clutter and decay. More alarmingly, investigators found disturbing objects and evidence suggesting that local graves had been disturbed. According to police reports, they discovered human remains that had been fashioned into household items and clothing. Contemporary news accounts described the scene in lurid, sensational language that immediately captured national attention and fed public alarm. The reality of what was found was grim and spoke to a severe, long-term mental breakdown. However, the media coverage often exaggerated or invented details, creating a macabre legend that quickly overshadowed the factual, albeit horrifying, evidence. Today, we will stick to the verified facts from official reports and avoid the vivid, sensational descriptions that turned a tragic case into a ghoulish spectacle. Ed Gein was arrested and charged in connection with the death of Bernice Warden. During questioning, he admitted to her killing and also to the death of Mary Hogan years earlier. The legal process that followed focused heavily on his mental state. Court-appointed psychiatric evaluations concluded that he suffered from significant mental illness, specifically schizophrenia. He was deemed unfit to stand trial initially and was confined to a state hospital for the criminally insane. Court records and hospital reports describe a complex psychiatric profile rather than a person of simple evil. A decade later, he was declared competent to stand trial, was found guilty of the murder of Bernice Warden, but was also found legally insane at the time of the crime. He was returned to a psychiatric institution where he spent the rest of his life. He was described by staff as a quiet, polite patient, a stark contrast to the monstrous figure portrayed in the media. The case became a national sensation. Newspapers amplified the most shocking details, and a cultural panic followed. The story of the quiet man from Plainfield tapped into a deep-seated fear of the evil that could lurk behind a neighbor's friendly face. Soon, novelists and filmmakers began to draw on elements of the case. Robert Bloch's 1959 novel Psycho was directly inspired by the Gein story, particularly the idea of a killer with a domineering, deceased mother. Alfred Hitchcock's film adaptation solidified this character in the public imagination. Over time, other components of the Gein case often distorted inspired characters in major horror films, including Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. But these works reshaped reality into fantasy. The chainsaws, the masks of human skin worn by the killer, the active cannibalism, these were creations of storytellers, not details found in the courtroom. The Gein case forces us to ask difficult questions. How do journalists and storytellers treat crimes that strike at our sense of safety and community? How do we remember the victims' people like Mary Hogan and Bernice Wood and avoid turning their suffering into entertainment? Some scholars argue for careful, respectful reporting that prioritizes facts and context. They caution that sensationalism exploits trauma and creates a distorted public memory. Others note that the horror genre often serves as a way for society to process its deepest anxieties, even if it distorts real events to do so. Our aim here is to recount the historical facts, respect those who were affected, and explore the cultural aftermath without sensationalizing the underlying trauma. The line between informing the public and creating a spectacle is a thin one, and the legacy of the Gein case is a powerful reminder of a storyteller's responsibility. Though the most lurid details entered the popular imagination, historians and criminologists ask us to look deeper at the impacts of profound isolation, untreated mental illness, and complex family dynamics. The story is not just about a single man, but also about how a small, tight-knit community responded to something truly unthinkable. It's a case study in how the media can shape a narrative, turning a mentally ill man into a mythic monster. Edward Gein died in a state institution in 1984. But his case left a complex legacy. It serves as both a cautionary tale about the critical need for mental health awareness and support, and a sobering instance of how real-life crime becomes myth. The horror isn't just in the details of the case, but in how easily fact can be twisted into fiction, and how that fiction can become more powerful than the truth. This is a difficult story not because it makes us fear monsters, but because it asks us to think about people, institutions, and the ways we turn reality into fiction. The horror icons inspired by this case are now cultural fixtures, but the true story behind them is one of tragedy, illness, and loss. If you found this account thoughtful, we invite you to continue the conversation. How should creators balance truth and storytelling when real people are involved? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.